Power hates mirrors it cannot control. Some men move through life like a control room, levers pulled, switches flipped, outcomes predicted before anyone else has finished speaking. They run companies, families, rooms, narratives. People orbit them instinctively, adjusting their tone, their posture, even their opinions without being told. Authority clings to them so naturally it feels invisible. And then you show up, not loudly, not defiantly. You don't challenge him, expose him, or make speeches about independence. You simply exist in a way his influence doesn't land on. And that's where the tension begins. Because control isn't tested by opposition, it's tested by irrelevance. The moment power meets someone it can't move, it starts malfunctioning. Here's a quiet fact most people never notice. Influence works best when it's unconscious. The second it has to try, it's already weakening. That's why the man who runs everything becomes oddly human around you, slightly careful, a little delayed, sometimes even polite, in a way that feels negotiated. Not because you're special in the usual way, but because you don't play the role his system depends on. Others feel it before they understand it. Conversations shift, his timing changes, the room recalibrates itself around an unspoken exception. You're not the rebel, you're the glitch. And glitches make powerful people nervous, not because they break the machine, but because they prove it was never flawless to begin with. There's a strange humor in it too. The man who manages chaos like a spreadsheet suddenly can't manage one variable. No amount of authority, charm, or strategy seems to install the update. And everyone notices. Not dramatically, just enough for the myth to thin. This isn't about dominance, ego, or theatrics. It's about what happens when control meets someone who doesn't need to be controlled, and why that quiet imbalance speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Number one, you disrupt his sense of authorship over reality. He's used to feeling like the writer of the room, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, constant way. He sets the tone, decides what matters, and shapes how events are remembered. People usually help him without knowing it. They agree a little faster, adjust their opinions slightly, and retell stories in a way that keeps him at the center. Over time, this gives him a dangerous comfort, the belief that reality itself responds to him. Around you, that comfort disappears. You don't echo his framing. You don't carry his version of events forward. When he describes what's happening, it doesn't quite stick to you. You respond based on what you actually see, not on what he's trying to establish. That breaks something subtle but essential. He's not just losing influence, he's losing narrative control. This is deeply unsettling because control-driven people don't just want outcomes. They want authorship. They need to feel like the origin point of meaning. When that role is disrupted, even slightly, it creates an internal friction they can't easily name. They'll replay conversations with you later, trying to figure out where the script slipped. Nothing looks wrong on the surface, yet nothing feels settled either. What makes it worse is that you're not resisting. Resistance would confirm his importance. You're simply not participating in the rewrite. You let facts stay plain. You let moments remain unpolished. You don't decorate his authority with extra weight. That neutrality acts like a mirror he didn't agree to stand in front of. Others sense this shift without needing it explained. They notice that his version isn't the only one anymore. When someone like him loses authorship over one person, it quietly weakens the illusion of total control. If reality doesn't bend everywhere, then maybe it never did. There's an almost ironic twist to it. The more he tries to reassert control, the more obvious the effort becomes, and effort exposes dependence. You become the reminder that his power works best when people cooperate unconsciously, and that cooperation is optional. You don't take anything from him. You simply stop giving something he assumed was automatic. And in that absence, his certainty unravels just enough for everyone to feel it, even if no one says a word. Number 2, his authority doesn't translate in your direction. He walks through life expecting compliance. It's subtle, often invisible, but it's there, an energy that says, I decide how this goes. In most rooms, it works. People adjust without thinking, follow unspoken rules, and confirm his presence with tiny gestures, a nod, a pause, a softened tone. That's the rhythm of his power. But when he's around you, the rhythm skips. His usual influence doesn't land, doesn't stick, and doesn't echo back. It's as if you're tuned to a completely different frequency. This is alarming because he measures authority in results. If people act the way he expects, he feels in control. If they don't, he senses a glitch. With you, there's no glitch to fix, no obvious defiance to counter, just a consistent neutrality that refuses to acknowledge him as the driver. That refusal is quiet but profound. It exposes a limit he doesn't like to admit exists. Authority that can't translate is authority that doesn't exist in practice, no matter how impressive it looks on paper. Others notice too, even subconsciously. People sense when the man who usually directs outcomes isn't directing you. It changes the dynamics of every interaction. Conversations shift, energy shifts, and suddenly the room is aware that there's a space where his rules don't apply. That awareness is contagious. Respect and compliance, the things he relies on to maintain the illusion of control, start to feel conditional rather than absolute. He may try subtle maneuvers to assert himself, tone changes, pauses, charm, but the effect is different. Effort exposes dependence, and dependence exposes fragility. Around you, authority can't be performed. It can only be observed failing. This doesn't make him less competent in the world. It makes him human. And humans who are used to total translation, where influence spreads effortlessly, often struggle to adapt when it doesn't. You don't have to challenge him, argue, or push. You simply exist outside the gravitational pull of his power, and in doing so, you reveal a truth that everyone else senses but can't articulate. His reach, impressive as it is, has limits, and those limits are undeniable in your presence. Number 3, you trigger a calibration failure he can't fix. He is used to measuring everything, people, situations, even moods, like instruments on a dashboard. Every gesture, every word, every pause feeds his internal calculations. He predicts responses, adjusts tone, times interventions. It's a system that works flawlessly because the inputs are reliable. But around you, the system starts to wobble. You don't respond the way he expects. Your reactions aren't predictable, and that triggers a kind of internal alarm he isn't used to hearing. This failure is small at first, a missed cue, a pause where he expected agreement. But it grows. He notices patterns failing. Strategies that worked everywhere else lose traction with you. His instincts, honed over countless interactions, begin to misfire. That's terrifying for someone whose identity is wrapped up in mastery. He isn't used to being outmaneuvered by circumstance or temperament alone. You don't even try to maneuver. You simply exist, and that's enough to destabilize him. The way he handles people is based on consistency. Influence doesn't have to be loud or forceful. It only has to be reliable. But you aren't reliable in the way he needs. And suddenly every prediction he's ever made comes under scrutiny. He'll replay encounters in his head, searching for where the miscalculation began, overanalyzing signals that weren't signals at all. That constant, invisible recalibration is exhausting, and it's visible to everyone who observes it. What makes this uniquely disarming is that it doesn't require defiance. You don't have to confront him, argue, or prove a point. By simply being outside his operational framework, you highlight a truth he can't ignore. Control is fragile, and even a single anomaly can ripple through a system. This isn't about power struggles. It's about exposure. The man who runs everything suddenly looks human, not in a charming way, but in a raw, uncertain way. You become the mirror that reflects a system's imperfection, a system he always assumed was seamless. And in that reflection, the illusion of mastery cracks just enough for everyone else to notice. Number 4, you expose that his control is positional, not personal. He has spent years building a world where his word carries weight, where his presence bends people's actions almost without effort. Around most people, his influence feels natural, inevitable, like gravity itself. But with you, that gravitational pull doesn't exist. You don't respond to the title, the status, or the curated image he carries. You respond to the person, and the person you respond to isn't the one he projects. That distinction is quietly devastating. This is the point where the facade begins to crack. He starts to realize that what he thought was personal authority, the kind that comes from respect, admiration, or charisma, is often just positional. People comply because it's convenient, safe, or expected, not because they genuinely acknowledge him. You make that visible. You reveal that his power has limits, that it's conditional, and that the respect he assumed was innate is often borrowed. Others notice too. There's something magnetic about someone who refuses to treat a powerful person as infallible. Conversations shift subtly, attention shifts, and suddenly the dynamics he relies on everywhere else no longer apply. The illusion that he is universally commanding is replaced by a quiet acknowledgement. Influence doesn't always follow him, and control is never absolute. He may try to reclaim it by leaning on position, by name-dropping, by reminding you of hierarchies or achievements. But those tactics fail because you're not responding to the narrative he built. You're responding to reality. That refusal is disarming. The more he attempts to assert dominance, the more obvious it becomes that his reach is limited. What you do is not rebellion. It's neutrality paired with authenticity. You exist in a way that forces him to confront a simple but uncomfortable truth. Authority built on position alone is fragile, and real influence requires something he hasn't earned from you. And in exposing that, you silently show everyone around him that control is never as absolute as it seems, no matter how many systems, titles, or reputations he has meticulously built. Number 5, he starts overmanaging himself instead of others. He is accustomed to running everything, people, projects, rooms, outcomes. Control is his default mode, and the world has learned to respond to it. But with you, something unusual happens. His usual levers of influence don't work. Commands don't land, subtle cues are ignored, and the energy he normally channels outward suddenly has nowhere to go. That's when you see the shift. Instead of directing the room, he begins policing himself. Every gesture, word, and expression is measured. Every glance, every tone, every laugh is filtered through a lens of calculation. He overcompensates because he senses, often without admitting it, that the usual shortcuts no longer exist. This overmanagement is fascinating because it exposes vulnerability in a way that isn't dramatic or loud. He doesn't explode. He tightens. Small movements, small corrections, repeated micro-adjustments. Where he once relied on instinct and influence, he now relies on meticulous self-control. And in doing so, the energy that used to dominate others is redirected inward, creating tension you can almost feel in the room. Others pick up on it without realizing why. The man who typically projects effortless authority now seems rehearsed, cautious, slightly offbeat. Subtle patterns that usually signal dominance, confidence, timing, rhythm are disrupted. People notice the discrepancy between who he is and the role he's trying to perform, and that awareness undermines the aura of control he normally radiates. There's a quiet irony here. Power that spreads outward effectively leaves little trace of doubt. Power that turns inward is heavy, obvious, and exhausting. And the more he tries to regain control externally, the more apparent his internal struggle becomes. Around you, mastery looks human, fragile, and calculated. You don't have to confront him, challenge him, or even speak loudly. Your presence alone forces this self-monitoring. By simply not responding the way he expects, you redirect his energy inward, exposing cracks that no one else has the privilege or the insight to see. In doing so, you shift the dynamic entirely. The man who usually runs everything is now running himself, and everyone around him senses the difference. Number 6, you create a visible exception in his pattern. He thrives on patterns. People moving in predictable ways, reactions falling into expected rhythms, environments bending subtly to his influence. This is his comfort zone. He reads rooms like maps, predicts behavior like a finely tuned algorithm, and relies on the certainty that comes from repetition. But with you, the pattern breaks. You don't follow the predictable rhythm, and that exception immediately draws attention, not just from him, but from everyone around. This is more powerful than defiance or argument because it's not loud, it's observable. People notice that he can't move you the way he moves others. Small things, pauses, expressions, choices, or even silence, stand out. The consistency of his usual authority is interrupted, and the disruption becomes visible, like a flaw in an otherwise polished design. Others subconsciously register that something is different, even if they can't articulate why. Your presence becomes a quiet anomaly that subtly shifts the energy in the room. He may try to correct it. He might increase charm, insistence, or influence, testing boundaries. But each attempt highlights the anomaly even more. Effort reveals that what he once assumed was effortless, compliance, agreement, automatic alignment, does not exist here. Around you, his influence is negotiable, limited, and conditional. That is terrifying for someone who depends on control being seamless. The brilliance of this is in its simplicity. You're not breaking rules or challenging authority with statements or gestures. You simply refuse to be a predictable variable in his system. That refusal alone creates a ripple effect. People start to see that power isn't as absolute as it appears, that the man who runs everything actually has exceptions. One exception in your case. By existing outside the expected pattern, you force a recalibration in perception. His aura of inevitability diminishes not because of confrontation, but because patterns are meant to be unbroken. When one person consistently escapes those patterns, the structure of perceived authority is quietly shaken, and the room instinctively knows it. You are the exception everyone notices, the invisible proof that control is never as complete as it seems. Number 7, his ego begins paying a daily tax. He is built on confidence, or the appearance of it. Every interaction, every decision, every look is filtered through an ego that thrives on acknowledgement. People rarely challenge it, and even fewer ignore it. That energy is what fuels him, the invisible currency that keeps his world spinning smoothly. But around you, that currency doesn't circulate. You don't feed it, you don't validate it, and you certainly don't inflate it. And suddenly, the cost of maintaining that ego becomes apparent, like a daily tax he never anticipated. This isn't about public embarrassment or confrontation. It's subtler, almost surgical in its effect. Every word he carefully chooses, every tone he calibrates, every posture he assumes, now comes with a mental ledger. He weighs not just how to influence, but how to survive a space where his authority is not automatic. That constant calculation drains him in a way that no visible resistance could. He becomes aware of effort he didn't need to expend before, and that awareness alone is destabilizing. Others notice it, even without realizing why. The man who normally radiates effortless control now shows micro signs of strain, hesitation, over-clarification, small self-corrections. Those around him pick up on it intuitively. The aura of infallibility thins because maintaining it requires energy that he must now devote to simply navigating your presence. There's a darkly ironic humor to it. The very traits that make him seem untouchable in other rooms, confidence, decisiveness, charisma, become fragile under the weight of your neutrality. Every encounter subtly subtracts from his certainty. He doesn't collapse, but he recalculates, hesitates, and measures himself more than he measures others. You never intended to attack him. You simply exist in a way that doesn't validate the self-image he depends on. That refusal becomes an invisible drain on his ego, a quiet erosion that everyone else can sense. And in the process, you reveal a truth about power. It is strongest when it flows freely, and dangerously weak when it encounters a presence that refuses to recognize it. Number 8. You don't grant him the emotional compliance he expects. He's used to people handing him pieces of themselves without even thinking. Agreement, admiration, tension, fear. These are the quiet confirmations he relies on, the invisible threads that make his presence feel powerful and complete. Around you, those threads don't exist. You don't react the way he expects. You don't give him the emotional signals he counts on to feel in command. That absence is subtle, but for someone who measures the world through responses, it is destabilizing. He notices it immediately, even if he can't put it into words. Conversations feel heavier, pauses linger longer, and subtle attempts at influence don't land. Where he expects validation, he finds neutrality. Where he expects resistance or deference, he finds nothing. And that nothing is far more powerful than any argument or confrontation could be. Emotional compliance is like fuel to him. Without it, he starts recalculating, second-guessing, even rehearsing responses that previously came naturally. Others in the room notice the difference too. They see him operating without the usual confirmation, the invisible nods and cues that reinforce authority. The air shifts in ways that can't be explained, but it's felt. The man who usually commands energy now has to manage it internally. He becomes quieter, more cautious, a little off balance because his usual way of measuring success, through the emotional alignment of those around him, is blocked. You don't have to challenge him or make a statement. You simply exist without giving him the emotional currency he expects. That absence forces him to confront a truth he rarely admits. Influence is conditional, and even the most confident people rely on the consent of others. The subtle refusal to react becomes a mirror, reflecting back the reality that his control is not as absolute as it appears. By withholding the unconscious affirmation he's accustomed to, you expose a hidden vulnerability. Power isn't just about actions, decisions, or titles. It's about the emotional architecture others build around it. When that architecture isn't there, even the most commanding presence begins to wobble, and everyone around senses the quiet collapse of certainty. Number 9, you reveal that control without consent is fragile. He's spent a lifetime convincing himself that control is a natural extension of his presence. People follow him, agree with him, adjust to him, not because they have to, but because he's mastered the art of making them feel like they do. That's the invisible power he wields effortlessly. But with you, that illusion doesn't hold. You don't bend to expectation. You don't play by the unspoken rules that make his authority feel seamless. And in doing so, you reveal a truth he would rather ignore. Control without consent is inherently unstable. It's subtle, almost surgical in its effect. You aren't openly defiant. You don't announce rebellion. You simply exist in a way that doesn't respond to manipulation, hierarchy, or coercion. And that absence of automatic compliance throws his entire system off balance. Where he is used to predictability, he encounters ambiguity. Where he expects alignment, he finds independence. And that independence isn't loud, it's quiet, consistent, and impossible to erase. Others notice it instantly. The room behaves differently when someone refuses to participate in the usual choreography of influence. Conversations take unexpected turns. Timing shifts. The subtle power dynamics everyone else has learned to respect no longer apply to you. That visibility undermines his authority in a way he can't counteract. Effort to regain control only emphasizes the fragility. The more he tries to impose, the more obvious it becomes that compliance is not inherent, it's conditional. The brilliance of this is that it doesn't require confrontation. You are not challenging him directly, you are simply not granting him what he expects, the unconscious consent that turns control into power. And in that, you expose a fundamental reality. Authority is never absolute. It exists only where it is accepted, and the moment acceptance is withheld, even subtly, the whole structure wobbles. By being this quiet exception, you reveal his limits to everyone around him. You prove that control is not a given. It is fragile, borrowed, and entirely dependent on the willingness of others. And that revelation resonates far louder than any argument or challenge ever could. Number 10, he loses his predictive edge around you. He is used to knowing what's coming before it happens. Every conversation, every decision, every glance feeds into a mental map he has built over years, an instinctive grid of cause and effect that allows him to anticipate outcomes with uncanny accuracy. Around most people, this works flawlessly. He predicts responses, navigates interactions, and orchestrates outcomes with the ease of someone conducting a well-rehearsed symphony. But with you, the symphony falters. You do not move as expected. You do not react in patterns he can trace. You exist outside the logic of his predictions, and that unpredictability is disarming. It's more than just annoyance, it's destabilizing. He begins to second-guess himself in ways he rarely does. Subtle decisions that once required no thought now demand careful consideration. Every word, every gesture, every expression is recalculated. He runs mental simulations over and over, searching for a pattern that doesn't exist. And in that process, the effortless command he usually exercises becomes laborious, uncertain, and visible. Others notice too. The man who normally navigates situations with precision now hesitates. Timing is off. Decisions appear slower, more deliberate, almost cautious. That hesitation is contagious. It shifts the energy in the room and subtly undermines his authority. People unconsciously sense that the person who usually has it all figured out is operating in unfamiliar territory. You don't need to challenge him. You don't argue or defy. Your unpredictability alone creates the effect. It is the absence of a predictable response, the refusal to fit into his calculated expectations, that forces him to confront a reality he has rarely faced. Control depends on foreknowledge, and when foresight fails, authority falters. By simply being untraceable, you expose the limits of his mastery. His predictive edge, the quiet engine of his influence, becomes useless, and that weakness, though subtle, is profoundly visible to anyone paying attention. In your presence, the man who usually orchestrates outcomes effortlessly is forced to improvise, and improvisation, something he never needed elsewhere, becomes the quiet proof of his vulnerability. Number 11. His reputation starts doing the talking for you. He is accustomed to being the center of attention, the one whose presence carries weight without effort. People watch him, listen to him, and often follow his cues automatically. That reputation, carefully built, polished over time, and reinforced by predictable responses, gives him authority that feels almost untouchable. But around you, something shifts. You don't respond in ways that reinforce his narrative. You aren't moved by his reputation, and that changes everything. When others see him fail to command you, they notice. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet, subconscious ways. They pick up on the anomaly. The man who usually bends outcomes with influence now has to exert effort just to engage with you, and the effort is visible. His reputation, which normally amplifies his authority, begins to speak for you instead. People start to interpret his struggle, his miscalculated charm, and his subtle hesitation as evidence that your presence matters more than his control. This is what makes it so powerful. You don't have to say a word, and you don't need to act boldly. The fact that he cannot dominate or predict you is enough for everyone else to see the truth. His reputation, which was once an extension of his authority, now unwittingly signals your strength. Every attempt he makes to assert influence becomes a contrast against your calm neutrality, and that contrast draws attention. People start noticing the room behaves differently around you, and suddenly you are the anomaly everyone is watching. The irony is striking. He is used to people reflecting his power back at him. With you, the reflection is gone, and his carefully crafted image inadvertently highlights your independence. Where he expected to be the unquestioned authority, he becomes the measure by which others recognize your influence. In exposing this subtle reversal, you shift the dynamics without confrontation, without drama. His reputation, intended to reinforce his control, quietly elevates you. People see what he cannot command, and in that space your presence resonates louder than any title or achievement ever could. You exist as the living proof that influence, no matter how polished, depends on others' acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement, in your case, cannot be bought or forced. Number 12. You turn him into a witness instead of a driver. He is used to orchestrating everything around him, conversations, decisions, moods, even outcomes. The world bends quietly to his presence because he has trained it to. People move, react, and align almost unconsciously, reinforcing the sense that he is always in control. But with you, the dynamic flips. You don't respond the way he expects. You don't allow yourself to be directed or managed. And in that shift, he is no longer the one driving the interaction. He becomes the observer, the witness, silently tracking what you choose to do. This role reversal is subtle but profound. It doesn't matter if he's the most commanding person in the room. Around you, his influence is limited. He watches, calculates, and adjusts constantly. But the initiative, the movement, the agency rests entirely with you. That makes him uncomfortable in a way few people ever see. Control is a habit, a muscle he has exercised for years. When that muscle is idle, when it can't extend outward, he experiences a tension that is hard to hide. Every action he takes is measured, careful, second-guessed, because he senses that the usual scripts don't apply. Others pick up on this shift immediately, even if they don't consciously analyze it. They notice the unusual stillness in him, the slight hesitation before speaking, the repeated recalibration of tone and timing. He is operating differently because he is no longer the orchestrator. He is reacting to someone who refuses to be orchestrated. That subtle change is magnetic and disorienting. It makes your presence stand out, not because you challenge him aggressively, but because you claim the space of action he expected for himself. The brilliance of this dynamic is in its quiet execution. You do not confront, argue, or dominate. You simply act, think, and exist independently. And in doing so, you reveal a truth that is invisible to most. Even the most commanding people are vulnerable when they are forced into observation rather than execution. You make him witness your autonomy, and that alone shifts the balance of perception. Around you, he loses the effortless authority he depends on, and everyone who sees it senses the quiet recalibration. Number 13. You surface the difference between influence and dominance. He is used to thinking of himself as dominant, someone whose presence bends outcomes and whose decisions carry weight simply because he expects them to. Dominance for him has always been about authority, titles, and control. Influence is the tool he uses to make dominance feel effortless. Around most people, it works perfectly. People follow, adjust, and respond without resistance. But with you, that distinction becomes impossible to ignore. You don't react to his dominance the way others do. You don't automatically validate it, and that forces a quiet but undeniable truth to surface. Dominance alone is fragile. Influence is earned. This realization shakes the foundation of someone who believes power is absolute. He may be commanding in the room, but his authority only exists where compliance is granted. You expose that his dominance is conditional, dependent on the consent of others, while true influence is independent, quiet, and self-sustaining. You don't need to challenge him aggressively. Your mere presence demonstrates that influence is about resonance, not command, and that dominance without that resonance is only a performance. Others notice it instinctively. They see him attempting the familiar gestures of control, timing, tone, body language, but they also see your unshakable independence. That contrast highlights the difference between imposed power and authentic influence. Where he relies on authority, you rely on presence. Where he expects compliance, you act freely. The room perceives the imbalance immediately, even if it is subtle. The effect on him is disarming. Every move he makes to assert dominance becomes more visible, more deliberate, and in that visibility, weaker. The more he insists, the more the audience sees that his control is borrowed. Around you, dominance doesn't impress. It reveals limits. Influence, on the other hand, emerges quietly through action, consistency, and presence. You embody influence without needing to prove it, and in doing so you highlight a truth that challenges him more than any confrontation could. Power is never inherent. It is relational, and the moment it meets someone who doesn't comply automatically, it becomes human, fallible, and exposed. Number 14. Your presence exposes the ceiling of who he really is. He moves through life projecting power, certainty, and competence, as if he has reached a level that is untouchable. People see him at the top of his game, decisive, composed, commanding. That image is carefully maintained because it benefits him, shapes perception, and reinforces his authority. But around you, the facade starts to crack. You don't respond to his usual methods of control or persuasion, and in that space, the limits of his power become obvious. What he can do to others suddenly doesn't work on you, and that exposes a ceiling he rarely confronts, the truth of who he is beyond the carefully constructed image. This isn't about humiliation or confrontation. It's about reality. He may have influence, charisma, and the ability to shape outcomes for those who fall in line, but he cannot extend it indefinitely. Your presence makes that clear. Every subtle hesitation, every repeated attempt to adjust, every careful recalculation becomes a signal that he has boundaries, even in domains where he once assumed none existed. That realization is unsettling because he's accustomed to thinking his reach is comprehensive, that the narrative he creates is absolute. You quietly prove that neither is true. Others notice this too. The shift isn't dramatic, but it is tangible. Where he normally exudes seamless authority, there is now micro-tension, visible only in small gestures, pauses, and corrections. People sense it subconsciously, and it changes how they perceive him, not in a critical way, but in a way that acknowledges limits. You highlight that power, no matter how polished, has edges. What makes it so compelling is that you don't need to challenge him openly. By simply existing on your own terms, Without bending, negotiating, or performing, you reveal the ceiling above his confidence and the walls around his influence. In that space, he becomes human, not weak, but undeniably bounded. And everyone who witnesses it, consciously or not, sees that even the man who seems to run everything has limits, ceilings, and vulnerabilities that are impossible to hide when someone refuses to play by his rules. Conclusion. What happens when someone who seems to run everything meets a presence they cannot move? Everything shifts, the patterns of control falter, the predictability that fuels authority disappears, and the carefully constructed image of dominance begins to crack. From disrupted authorship to exposed ceilings, from invisible influence to the quiet erosion of ego, every aspect of power is challenged without a single confrontation. You don't need to fight, argue, or prove anything. You simply exist in a way that refuses to be bent, guided, or predicted. That existence alone exposes fragility, shifts perception, and quietly rewrites the rules of engagement. Through your neutrality, consistency, and independence, you turn observers into witnesses and force even the most commanding individuals to confront a reality they seldom admit. Control is conditional, influence is earned, and authority is never absolute. What looks like effortless power in one context becomes laborious in another. The very mechanisms that create fear, admiration, or compliance elsewhere cannot operate where respect is voluntary and consent is withheld. And that ultimately is the most profound revelation of all. True strength isn't demonstrated by domination or titles. It is revealed in how presence shapes the room without coercion, how autonomy quietly shifts dynamics, and how the limits of even the most formidable people are exposed. If you've gained insight, seen the subtle truths of influence, and understood the quiet ways power meets resistance, don't let this lesson stay hidden. Hit the subscribe button to join the journey of uncovering deeper realities. Like and share this video so more people can see it, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. Because conversations like this are where understanding begins, and the power of presence becomes undeniable. Stay blessed always.